To our National Program Integrity webinar series. My name is Anne Renaud Avila with the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability. We're excited to talk to you all today about creating a family-friendly CCDF application while maintaining program integrity. We're going to allow for just a moment for everybody to get in, but while we're waiting, we just wanted to mention it's an interactive session with discussion. We do have slides available in the chat box, and if you have questions for panelists, you can use the Q&A box. Also, if you have tech or registration issues, please feel free to contact Teresa Campisi at the email address there. We are joined today by Maggie Quinn from the Office of Child Care, as well as Rebecca Shaw and Sarah Esty. And I'm Anne Renaud Avila, joined by Janae Williams and Michael McKenzie from our Program Integrity and Accountability team. With that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Maggie Quinn for a welcome.
Hello, everybody. My name is Maggie Quinn, and I am the Associate Deputy Director of the Office of Child Care. Our director, Ruth Friedman, wanted to be here today, but she was pulled away at the last minute. But I am so happy to be here and share on behalf of the OCC leadership team how excited we are about this new resource. OCC is committed to reducing the burden on families and applying for CCDF childcare assistance. And we partnered with the U.S. Digital Service, who approached this work through a lens of their research on user-friendly applications that reduce burden on families. So we've designed this guide to help you update and simplify the content and format of your family applications, drawing from best practices in benefits application design process, all already allowed under federal law and in use today. The process of applying for CCDF assistance does not need to be complicated, confusing, invasive, or frustrating for families. And with relatively simple changes to application questions and definitions, layout, and required documents, we can really make a big difference in reducing the time tax to apply for CCDF assistance. We've also provided an end-to-end model childcare assistance application that shows how these best practices can fit together. And this guide builds on materials we previewed at STAM and now includes additional content based on your feedback. So I just wanted to come today and thank you all for coming and for your interest in considering best practices to make your CCDF applications more family-friendly. We are committed to making the assistance process less burdensome for families, and both OCC and NPIWS stand ready to support you in your improvement efforts. So I'm going to turn it back over to Anne.
For our agenda today, we are going to talk about the purpose and contents of the family-friendly application guide. We'll also explore some of the eligibility flexibilities for CCDF. And then we are going to talk about strategies for maintaining program integrity when you're creating a family-friendly application guide. We also will have time at the end for final questions and answers and wrap up. And we do have an evaluation at the end that we would ask that you fill out. Also, if there's any questions that we're unable to answer, we will follow up with you after the webinar today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Sarah Esty.
Thanks. So I'm so excited to be here today telling you about our simplified application guide and our model application. So starting with why did we do this? So we did this because we heard from families that applying for childcare assistance was harder than it needed to be. They said things like, I wish childcare was as easy as SNAP. Childcare is the hardest application I filled out. Or they talked about how hard it was to figure out what to do while they waited to get approved for their subsidy. And maybe they had taken time off of work to have the baby. Maybe they had moved and were starting a new job and needed new childcare. But the gap between when they needed that care, needed that subsidy, and when they were able to get approved was really hard to bridge. And maybe they lost a slot or were trying to scramble and fill in their childcare needs while they waited to get their determination back. And so we were coming from the point of what can we do to make it easier for those families to apply and to get fast determinations. And also realizing that there is a lot that we could do at the federal level to make it easier for all of you on the front lines to run your programs in an easier, simpler fashion for everyone. So, thinking about what this could look like, this can look like lots of different things depending on where you're at today with your application process. So, this could be helping move from a long or complicated or confusing set of questions to a shorter form, to more plain language, to testing with real users. This could be moving from paper based applications or a PDF that you have to download and mail in to something that is online and that is mobile friendly, knowing so many of our users are using their phones, not computers. This can be thinking about integrating applications from multiple programs. So you only have to enter your information once, only have to submit documents once. It can be stripping down document requirements and knowing that collecting the required documents or answering follow up questions if you haven't submitted the right things is often the most burdensome part of the application, not actually filling out the questions. Um, and it can also be following up with people so they know what's happening with their application and they also don't miss deadlines or renewals. So we're here to think about what can we do to move all of those forward. And this is building off of many years of work that Nixia has been leading on ways to make your processes more family friendly. So there's this excellent brief that was put out in 2018 and ongoing work in this space to look at new innovative approaches to streamlining application processes. So this guide has a couple things in it. First, it talks about how to define, collect, and verify eligibility information and has a model end to end application that shows how you put all of those pieces together. It also includes practical changes that you can consider making to your questions, your layout, your flow, and your verification processes. So, not just kind of what does the application look like, but what happens on the back end. We built this guide as a partnership between the Office of Child Care and the US Digital Service. We got input from families, from state and territorial staff, from our regional program managers. We looked over the federal requirements, we worked with our legal teams, and we also just applied design best practices from the US Digital Service. So you can see here kind of many of the folks we talked to, but the short version is that there was a lot of input. And this is as you might be thinking about changes you want to make, think about how you're getting feedback on those changes from your real users. So if you're making changes on the front end, are you talking to families? If you're making changes on the back end, are you talking to caseworkers? Because sometimes what you might think is clear or easy isn't that way when you actually talk to folks. Or maybe the biggest pain point for them is not what you think it is. And so we are really steeped in these human-centered design practices. And that is part of what has allowed us to create this guide. And we hope that those same techniques will be helpful for all of you. So within the guide, there's three main sections, and the whole guide is available, I think, as you all know, up on our TA website. It's an interactive website as opposed to kind of a printed PDF, and takes you through each of the sections of the application. So there is a piece around the application content, so defining, collecting, and verifying information. It includes a number of different topics and some state examples. There are guidelines for designing a successful application, so thinking about the look and feel. And then there is a section on how you balance this work against program integrity. And so we're going to talk through all three of these sections today in our webinar. So first, defining, collecting, and verifying information. In this section, you'll learn about the information that you need to capture for all the key parts of the application. You'll also think about how do you verify that information. So where do you have required documents and what should those documents be? Do you have backup processes if people don't have those documents? Or where do you require a document up front versus where do you start with pulling data from existing systems that maybe means that you can skip submitting documents unless something has changed for the family. It also thinks about how to define certain key terms and policy requirements in ways that meet federal requirements, but also maybe are less burdensome for families. Because in certain circumstances, a narrow or a broader definition might make it much easier for people to follow the requirements. We also include example screens for each of these requirements. And so you can see here the sections of our sample application, which we go through in the guide. And Rebecca's going to join in a little bit to do a deeper dive into some of the sections that we found might be most helpful for all of you. The second part of the guide talks about designing a successful application. So this is where you'll learn about best practices in the look and feel and flow of the application. And so this is not necessarily about the content so much as about how folks will experience that content and make it readable and easy to navigate. The next section talks about how to make changes while maintaining program integrity. And that's part of why we're so excited to do this webinar jointly today with Nixia, because we really believe that there is collaboration to be had between the goals of making your applications family friendly and the goals of ensuring that your programs are run with integrity. And we'll be talking about that in more detail later. So you will also then see the full model application and some of the screen by screen information about how you can customize it. And you'll see these orange arrows show places where either you'll need to customize a question for your state definitions or your state requirements, or information saying things like, if the person answers no to this question, jump ahead to this next section and you can skip a number of questions. Or if you already asked this question earlier in the application, don't re-ask it here. And so we built in notes about that kind of logic flow that you'll want to work with your team that runs the website for the application to build in that interactive logic to make it easier for families to follow. Now, a quick note about who this guide was created for. This guide is not an actual application that is in use anywhere, so it is not for families. This is really for all of you and for your vendors and partners who help you build and run your application system. So we hope this can give you a structure, a set of examples, some ideas, some language that you can use. Some of you may want to adopt the whole application, and that's great. Some of you might want to look at a particular section. Maybe you're saying, we know we've had trouble with gig workers and non-standard workers figuring out how to enter information about their jobs. We're really excited to just pull that little section over. Others of you might be inspired by some of the design recommendations, or you might really be excited about the balanced access and integrity scorecard. So really the hope is that you can use whatever pieces of this make most sense for you. Another important thing to think about if you are considering undertaking changes to your application is knowing where the burden is in the application process. And it might not be where you think it is. So it seems obvious for everyone the time spent completing the application is certainly a burden. And if your application is 45 pages long and takes 3 hours to write, and you have to handwrite the whole thing, like that itself could be a burden. But there's also certainly a burden associated with collecting and submitting required documents. And so reducing document requirements can often be even more effective in reducing the burden for families than necessarily even changing the questions. Things like confusing web interfaces. So, if there are lots of errors, or people don't know how to proceed, or questions are required on the website, but people think they shouldn't apply to them, so they can't get past it, that can also be a source of burden and delay. And then thinking about what happens after the application goes in. So, how do you have in person interviews, or are there follow ups to correct errors or get more information? And if your upfront application can reduce that back end work, that can also save huge amounts of time, both for your staff who's having to do the follow ups and for the families who have to come in or send in information. So, kind of a big theme for today is that these family friendly policies of streamlined application, streamlined document requirements, using existing data, those can benefit the families in less work to apply and faster determinations, and they can promote integrity of the program. Because when things are simpler, there's less information that could be entered incorrectly, there's less confusion and opportunity for error, there is less material for your staff to review, so it reduces burden on them, and it really can be a win-win all around. So, when we did our research here, we found that a couple of the eligibility requirements were the biggest burden for families and also one of the biggest sources of work for the caseworkers validating on the back end. So, specifically, looking at the definition of household, the definition of income, and showing a need for care, so that work and educational activities section, those are the areas where you have significant state and territorial flexibility to decide how you want to define those terms and how you want people to verify that information. And the choices you make around those three requirements have very big impacts on how complex it is on the front end and the back end. So we will talk in a little bit more detail about those requirements, and I'm going to pass over to my colleague, Rebecca.
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Like Sarah just said in the previous slide, so one of the ways to make the application process easier and reduce burden is to streamline eligibility and documentation requirements. So the following slides show some examples of how you can define eligibility requirements, and the slides will also highlight some examples of how some states have already simplified these approaches. The first example on the slide we're looking at is defining income. In order to be eligible for childcare, federal law requires that family income must be below 85% of state median income, but lead agencies can define what is included in the income calculation. Through their research and the feedback that they received, the U.S. Digital Service found that reporting and proving income can be the most burdensome part of the child care assistance application. So to reduce burden, OCC recommends that lead agencies simplify their definition of income by only including earned income or money received from employment and excluding money received from public benefits and child support. This simple definition reduces documentation requirements and also reduces barriers to entry into the program. The next slide talks about verifying income. So lead agencies can decide how to verify family income and which documents must be provided. Using income information from other state programs that families are enrolled in reduces burden and avoids families having to document income information more than once. The example in the call-out box on the side shows how North Carolina uses SNAP data for childcare income verification, which greatly reduces burden for families who are enrolled in more than one program. Limiting the number of pay stubs required to support income verification can also reduce burden, as well as accepting digital copies of documentation. Most of our business and payroll information is done online now, and digital copies are often much easier to obtain. You can also be flexible when verifying self-employment, including gig workers like Lyft drivers and Instacart shoppers. Documentation for self-employment can include contracts, bank statements, or payment receipts. You can also consider self-attestation if there is no other option. If documentation cannot be provided to prove self-employment income, you can allow applicants to self-certify by providing a signed and dated statement that includes a description of their work and amount of income earned in the past month. The next slide talks about protective services. Protective services is not defined in the final rule, and lead agencies can define it in a way that best serves their community. In this category, parents and guardians are not required to work or attend school when their child qualifies for protective services, and lead agencies can also waive income requirements for this eligibility category. When a lead agency defines protective services to cover a range of vulnerable populations, it reduces application burden for these families since they are not required to document their qualifying activity or income. The graphic on this slide is an excerpt from the guide, which provides examples of populations currently included in some definitions of protective services, as well as an example application screen showing some questions that can be developed to determine if a child qualifies for protective services. The guide recommends including simple yes or no questions for each situation defined as qualifying for protective services. On the next slide, we can see some examples of populations that lead agencies currently include under protective services, such as children with special needs, children experiencing homelessness, families impacted by a disaster, children being cared for by grandparents, and families experiencing a military deployment. The next slide is about how you can define working. The term working is not defined in the final rule. Instead, lead agencies must define what activities constitute working. OCC recommends including a broad range of activities in your definition of working, and you do not need to require a minimum number of hours for working. The application should clearly state what activities are considered as working. The call-out box on this slide shows Wisconsin's very broad definition of working. Regular employment, employer-sponsored training, and apprenticeships are included. There are no minimum working hours required for eligibility purposes. Our next example is family composition. A child care assistance application must capture information about the child who needs care and any parents residing in the home. Beyond this, there are no CCDF federal requirements that prescribe how a family unit must be defined. When determining household size, OCC recommends only requiring applicants to provide information about parents residing in the home. For extended households, requiring applicants to add everyone living in the house can cause a significant burden. It may be extremely difficult and burdensome to obtain income information for roommates or non-parents living in the household. The application should very clearly define household size and who is included. The example on this slide is from Massachusetts, and it shows a very simple definition of family size: parents and their dependent children and any dependent relatives residing in the same household, or a young parent and his or her children. This simple definition reduces application burden and the documentation needed to determine eligibility. Our last example is family asset certification. The CCDF rule requires that a family member certify that family assets do not exceed $1 million. And the preamble to the final rule states that the requirement can be met solely through self-certification by a family member with no further need for additional documentation. So then the excerpt from the application on this slide shows the question about assets and a simple yes or no answer, and that is all you need to capture this information. The guide also includes examples of optional questions you may consider, including to assist with ACF 801 reporting. Many lead agencies use the application process to collect demographic information and household details about the children and family enrolled in the program. And these details are then reported to OCC via the 801 report. The guide recommends that the application is clear and that these additional questions are optional and they will not impact eligibility. And now I'm going to hand it back to Sarah.
Thanks, Rebecca. So in thinking about the design, so once you kind of have the right questions, you've fixed the document requirements to be less burdensome, you also want to think about how to design the application so that it's easy to follow and easy to fill out. So this includes a number of things. First, you want to make the application layout simple and accessible. That can be things like using color to guide people through different sections, having icons and logos that people can see and understand, leaving white space, legible fonts, breaking things into chunks rather than having one super long thing that you have to scroll through. You also want to use plain language, and that is often very hard because you're trying to make sure that you're meeting the requirements of each of the regulations, and you don't want to use common language when you think a term of art is necessary, but it's so much easier for people filling out the applications if we use language that is clear and understandable. So asking people, what's your job rather than state your occupation. And that is something that we don't always do a great job of at the federal government, but is something that I think we all need to keep striving for. You also want to personalize the application and make it interactive. So, if in the first question you ask someone their name and the names and ages of their family members, later on, when you might be asking for the work history and income of other family members, or asking about which children in the family need care, you can pull in information from those earlier questions to say, you know, you said that your spouse is Sam. Does Sam have a job or educational activities that you need to report? You also want to make it interactive. So if somebody asks a question early on about, for example, whether they qualify for protective services, and their answer means that they can bypass a number of other questions because they don't have to meet certain requirements, have an interactive application that jumps them ahead and doesn't make them answer questions that are no longer necessary. Finally, you want to make sure the application is online and mobile friendly. We know that the vast majority of our beneficiaries have mobile phones and are doing a lot of their activities on those phones. So moving from paper based to desktops is great, from desktops to mobile, even better. And a great example of this is in Michigan. The My Bridges platform allows applicants to apply for 6 programs all at once. It was redesigned to be colorful with different colors for each section, lots of white space, easy to read fonts, clean layouts, breaking the application into little sections. It's mobile optimized, and it also is integrated with text message reminders and updates. So even after you've submitted your application, the department can stay in touch with beneficiaries about the status of their application. So, looking at our model application, we try to incorporate all of these design best practices. And so, you'll see things like the fact that it's broken into separate screens. You'll see that it auto populates information from one question to another. And then it includes those notes with the orange arrows that I mentioned earlier that tell you this is a question you might want to skip if it's now redundant to something you asked earlier. Or ask this question, and if they answer yes, send them here. If they answer no, send them there. One of the areas we know was most confusing for people was for folks trying to manage informal economy or non traditional work and knowing how to enter their jobs. And so that might be a screen you'd want to take particular look at, because we worked quite hard with folks to test out different ways of asking people to submit information about their jobs, to talk about their work hours if they vary week to week, to talk about how much money they make, maybe in a good month and a bad month. And so we've got some good examples that might be helpful for all of you struggling with some new challenges as the economy changes. We also know that this is a lot of work to make changes. It can be hard to do the human centered design work to reformat questions or to reorganize your application. You might have to do policy work if you want to make programmatic changes, and you also might need to make tech and IT changes as well. So there are several sources of funding that might be available. Uh, Perhaps you have a preschool development grant that can fund IT system and data system work. For those of you who still have ARP funds available, this would be something you could use those for. And then Nixia is also available to help with questions and technical assistance as you might be thinking about some of the changes you want to make or new business processes that you'd like to adopt. So I am now going to turn to the question of how you do all of these changes while also maintaining program integrity. And I think all too often these are considered to be opposing forces, but we think there's a real opportunity to do both at once. And that is what we'll say a little bit more about. So, from our family friendly policies brief, we know that streamlined eligibility processes are easier to administer and reduce the workload burden. So if you're able to ask fewer questions, ask for fewer documents, there's just less information to review, fewer things to cross-check, fewer places where a family might make an error in submission or a caseworker might make an error in review. That's why we find that lead agencies with less complex eligibility processes have fewer administrative errors. And so the goal is, how do we think about making these systems really easier for everyone who is participating? And that will help support our goal of also having a system with fewer errors in it. So now I'm going to pass off to my colleagues at Nixia to go into a little bit more detail. So Michael, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And again, thank you for joining us today. We just want to get into a little bit more in depth on the program integrity aspect of this. And the good news is you can increase access and maintain program integrity. So we just want to talk about that a little bit. Simplifying your application and the process connected to any type of program change really could increase your potential risk within your program. So specific internal controls to reduce improper payments and potential fraud, waste, and abuse should always be evaluated anytime you make a program change. These systems, policy, and process considerations are intended to complement and support your efforts to simplify your application. And as Sarah mentioned, American Rescue Plan funds are available and can still be used to simplify your application, as well as the requisite program integrity strategies that you might want to employ to support the changes. So what do we mean by internal control strategies? We're going to touch on a few of these in the next few slides, but in general, it's things like organizing your staffing structure and making sure that job duties are segregated, so not everybody's doing all of one type of task. Internal assessments of your policies on a regular basis. And then, of course, implementing quality control reviews or supervisory reviews just to check eligibility every so often, and using administrative data, whether it's data matching or development of red flag reports. And we're going to talk about a few of those in the next slides here. So red flag reports. Red flag reports are developed to analyze data from clients and providers. And these reports measure results and indicate if an investigation might be warranted. It doesn't mean that any type of fraud or improper payment has occurred, but it's a flag that you might want to check it out. And one of the things that we really like about red flag reports is you can tailor them to how you're running your program at this time. So we offered a few red flag report examples here, both for clients and providers, that might be relevant as you increase access through simplifying your application. Client red flag reports include unusual parent schedules, authorized hours that are greater than whatever threshold you might set, and current schedules for approved parent activities, whether that's employment or training, whatever it is. In terms of providers, very similar, unusual payment timing and payment grouping, as well as maybe unusual payment growth. I'm sure you all have your own ideas of what best supplements any changes you make to your simplified application, but these are just a few examples for you to consider in terms of red flag reports. And like I said, one of the nice things I like about red flag reports is that you can tailor them to how your program is operated. Supervisory and QA reviews are another strategy that many agencies employ. And I would make the case that if you're going to do this, we all know that there's a federal review required for the error rate review process every 3 years. More and more states seem to be mirroring that process in the years that they're not required to do their federal review. So again, it gives you a timely response in terms of what type of error trends are occurring right now. But it's another way to take this information and share it with your policy unit, with your training unit, and zeroing in on the types of errors that are inherent to your state and training and policy decisions to address that. All right, we want to talk about data sharing as well, but I'm going to have my colleague Janae Williams speak to these next few slides, and then I will return to wrap things up today. Janae?
Yes, sir. Thanks, Mike. All right, so as Mike stated, in the next few slides, we're going to talk about data. Specifically on this slide, we'll discuss data sharing. Data sharing is a strategy that allows agencies to collaborate and gather information on applicants that is available in other programs, agencies, or third-party providers. Through data sharing, an agency can alleviate the need to request certain pieces of information or verification outside of the applicant's changes in circumstances. In addition, through data sharing, an agency can also minimize, as everyone has spoke prior to me, the burden on families, as like I said, discussed earlier in the family-friendly guide. And also data sharing can reduce application processing time, administrative errors, improper payments, and also act as a fraud prevention tool when used on the front end. In addition, through data sharing and collecting all of the additional administrative data, a data mining technique can be utilized for fraud detection, right? On your screen, there is a list of possible options for, I'm sorry, I clicked that unintentionally. Possible options for data sharing, which include SNAP, Public Assistance, Reporting Information System, Paris, Social Security Administration, vital statistics, and so on. So when thinking in the future about your family-friendly application, the agency should really consider all avenues that can reduce verification requests to applicants. And we're going to switch gears here a little bit, since we did discuss a lot about data sharing and getting verification from other agencies, and look a little closer into the program integrity aspect and looking at the data processing approach. Specifically here, when using this approach and gathering administrative data, an agency can improve their program. And what we have here are a few tips that an agency can consider when using a data system or administrative data to improve their program. So first here, we have clearly defined the goals and outline the objective for meeting the goal. The purpose in doing this beforehand is to ensure the right questions are being asked in order to demonstrate the impact and progress. For example, an agency may have a goal to decrease the application processing time from 45 days to 30 days. And to meet this goal, the agency may implement a new verification strategy. Next on our list is data collection. Here, an agency can focus on retrieving data that will answer specific questions related to the goal, or focus on the process and collect data specific to the objective outcomes. One big key with the data collection is to have both historical and new data. And then in the next tip, we have here data analysis. In the data analysis, the agency can apply their own programming logic and parameters to their data sets to gain insight on trends and outcomes related to the goals and objectives. And last but not least, we have data evaluation. Here, it's important to understand that you may not get it right the first time, but evaluating your data use is very necessary. This helps the agency to determine if additional data is needed and also communicates the progress. Now, what we'll do here now is just take a deeper dive into data collection. and then data analysis before I turn it back over to Mike. So depending on the purpose of the data collected, it is important to stay focused on what is required of the applicant and what is needed for the agency. For example, an agency may choose to collect immunization verification from vital statistics to decrease the immunization verification errors that they're receiving. Or the agency may have a goal to decrease the percentage of applications that are denied for over the incoming error. Either way, defining the goal and outlining the objective of the agency is very important. In addition, an agency should identify the systems and processes that collect data. To this, internal discussions are needed to find out if it's new or existing data, where the data comes from, if a MOU or MOA is needed, how the agency will track the data, what QA or QC method will be used to sweep or clean the data and check for any abnormalities. Is the data going to provide qualitative or quantitative information or results, and how the agency plans on using the data. Meeting with your IT personnel continuously is also essential when using administrative data. Your IT personnel can keep management and leadership informed of opportunities for improvement and success. Now let's quickly look here at data analysis, which is a great way to gain insight on how the agencies, in this case, application processing performance is, and understand where application improvements need to occur. So the first thing with data analysis is that it does not have to be complicated. An analysis can be done with something as simple as an Excel spreadsheet, which is a cost-effective tool. If an agency does not want to spend a ton of money while still ironing out the details of what data the agency will use, or what type of analysis the agency is best for the agency. Excel can provide many of the functions a sophisticated software provides. While it may be more of a manual process and can be automated, the agency can still simply can apply simple programming metrics and analyze historical data in Excel. So as you begin to think and apply various approaches, one last suggestion we'd like to provide is that the agency keeps a log of the approaches that they have used in analyzing data to understand and also develop and improve their application process. Always be systematic and consistent. And that is all from the data side. And I will turn it back over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Janae. We have a little bit of time before I get into the next slide to answer a couple of questions. So, Sarah, did you want to take a crack at those?
Sure. So we saw a couple questions come in the chat, and anyone who's been holding questions, feel free to drop them in the chat as well. So we had a question come in asking whether applications need to include names and information of all children living in the home or only the children who need assistance. So only the children who need assistance need to have all that information submitted. You should just ask for the number of other children living in the home, because you'll want to make sure to calculate those children as part of the household size for determining if the family meets the income limits, but you don't need to collect their full demographic information. The other question we saw was whether we have any recommendations for an application or form builder. And I don't think we really have strong views on what sort of software platform you want to use. Our experience is that there are a lot of different tools and vendors kind of often come with their preferred coding languages or for preferred coding platforms. But the practices we're recommending around like the layout, the font size, exercises and having interactive flows should be doable with almost any coding system you have. But you will want to make sure that the system you're using does good scaling between the desktop version and the mobile version, and that you've tested a number of different browsers as well. So sometimes folks can run into trouble if they've maybe extensively tested with Microsoft Explorer or Chrome, but didn't test Firefox or Opera or Safari. So that is an important kind of question to look at as well. Another question coming in around best practice for language access. So we don't go into a ton of detail in the guide around language access, but there are a number of good resources on the HHS language access website to think about that. I would say in general, you want to think about making materials available in languages spoken by any sort of substantial number of your applicants, and also having staff available doing the intakes and follow-ups and any sort of hotlines or navigators, kind of anyone on the front lines who's going to be working with beneficiaries. Ideally having full-time staff who are speakers of those languages, and if not, having interpreter services available. Um, and then making sure that folks know, so kind of publicizing maybe on your application, signs in your offices, things like that, how people might go about getting access to materials in other languages and to request a language speaker staff or a translator. And then I see so when you show the yellow arrow to verbally send them past a number of questions, do you automatically skip them so they don't see them? Yes, that is the idea. So you'd kind of like, once you answer a question in a certain way, you could then like gray out or actually delete or skip past a whole section. And then when we say accessible, do we mean in general or 508 accessible? So I think accessible is used in some places in the guide in a more colloquial fashion. So thinking about kind of easy to follow, easy to read, but making sure that things are 508 accessible, and making sure that you've considered a variety of different disabilities, whether it's visual disabilities or physical disabilities, in the way that you are running your processes is certainly very important. So if you are going to use color coding, you'll need to make sure that it is accessible, or the like particular fonts that you're using when you're doing coding for elements on the website, thinking about whether things are being done with images or things that are a screen reader accessible. So there are certainly many types of different accessibility concerns to address. And I think that is it for questions for now. So I'm going to pass this back to Michael, but if there's other questions coming in, folks should keep dropping them in the chat and we'll get to them a little later.
Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. And we will have more time for additional discussion after a few more slides here. So one effective way to measure the effectiveness of any change you make is to create a scorecard. And so what you see on the screen right now is just an example of a scorecard for you to consider. And in this example, the agency that we created this for has priorities of ease of access, timeliness of determinations, and program integrity. So then you can see the sample measures, and we generally recommend that you look at this, maybe, take a measurement at the time of implementation, and then maybe 6 months down the line and a year down after that, just to check and see how your rate's going. So as an example, if you make a change to your application process and your abandonment rate goes up, you probably want to find out why, right? So again, it's going to take some additional information after you look at your measurements, but You know, there could be a couple different reasons. Maybe your new process created an additional barrier that you did not consider when you implemented this. Another option is maybe some people now correctly drop off during the completion of their online application because a pop-up correctly informed them that they were not eligible. And so rather than go through additional time and resources, they just stop the application at that point. So there are various reasons, but the point is, check it out. Look at things that are measurable to your agency, and take a measurement at implementation and a few milestones down the line to see how you're doing and see how effective your change has been. Why is measuring success critical? Well, you know, really measuring success to report results is a CCDF plan requirement for part of your plan, but it also provides you with good information to improve the administration of your program. And there are various good reasons. There's cost savings, there's insight and trends that you can share with your policy and training folks to improve your program. And it builds public trust and stakeholder buy-in if your program is being operated effectively. So here's a chance to talk about a few things that maybe you were doing. And honestly, this is an opportunity for you to ask any other question that you have related to this topic today. But just to maybe get the conversation started, you know, we wonder what changes you've made to your application process to make it easier for families. We saw a few examples already that Sarah and Rebecca shared from some of the states. We're also curious about maybe what your go-to fraud prevention and detection strategy is. Your peers may be interested in that. And also, does anybody use a scorecard for evaluating any of their CCDF activities right now? So we're going to open up the floor. Again, please put anything in the chat that you want to share with your peers. And if you have any other questions related to today's presentation, this is a good opportunity to include those questions right now as well. So we'll give you a couple of minutes to do that.
And for those who were asking earlier about language access, I've dropped a link to some HHS resources on different kind of like checklists and self-assessment tools and some best practices you might want to think about.
Sarah, as long as you're on, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wonder if you are aware of any agencies that have used a scorecard so far.
You know, I have not seen a lot of different state scorecards. So in a prior life, I worked at Michigan's Health and Human Services Department. And so I know that as that team was working to integrate their benefits applications from a number of different programs into a single new system and to reform their application process and their renewal process, they absolutely did have a number of metrics they were tracking. And we're doing a lot of what you were talking about too, which is looking at the trends and kind of thinking where those trends would cause them to dig deeper. So, for example, if you see a big drop off in applications, you might say, have we done something wrong because people can't submit applications? Or is something going well in the economy so fewer families need supports? And so I think that was, and so they'd have, I think, monthly meetings to take a look at the trend lines from the last month across a number of different metrics, from number of applications submitted to how long it took to get determinations back, the number of denials. And instead of just kind of saying, oh, this is what a good number is, this is what a bad number is, we're able to say, let's look at anything that looks like it's changed. And I think that is what's a little hard with developing a scorecard, is kind of a number isn't just a number. Sometimes that number can be evidence of something working well, and sometimes it's evidence of something that's not working well. So it's mostly just a starting point for conversation.
Great, thank you, Sarah. We did get a few comments in the chat box, and I'll share those with everybody right now. Luana Hayes Cooper indicates we are in the final stages of getting approved for our new interactive application, and it was good to see some of the changes we made match what you all were showing. I got a couple more great tips to share with my team, so this has been great so far. Thanks all. So thank you for that, Luana. I wasn't sure what state or territory or tribe you are from. But we also have a comment from Kathy from Ohio. She says, recently in Ohio, childcare recently went into the existing Ohio benefit system where applicants apply for cash assistance, food assistance, and Medicaid applications. The application is now online as well as in paper form. The online self-service portal can accept applications, verifications, and update to cases. Thank you, Kathy. And Luana is from the Illinois Bureau of Subsidy Management. Thank you, Luana. Anybody else want to share anything? Give you just a couple more minutes.
It would also be helpful if folks have kind of follow-on areas of interest, like the questions about 508 compliance and disability accessibility, about language access, kind of as we think about where there's further interest in developing out our resources and supports for you. We, for example, coming out of the STAM conference over the summer, had heard a lot of interest in getting help with tech and IT systems and kind of IT vendor management. So that's something we're certainly looking at to see if there's more things we can offer to support you in the coming months. But if there are other areas where resources or technical assistance or even links to existing resources would be helpful, do let us know.
Thank you, Sarah. All right. I don't see any additional feedback at this point. So again, if anything else you want to add or ask about, just jump in, but we're going to go ahead and move on with the presentation. We wanted to make you aware of some useful resources, and I believe everyone received a PDF of the slide deck today. So you will have the links that are identified in this next slide. I just want to make you aware of some useful resources around this topic. Of course, we've talked about the family-friendly child care assistance application guide and the model CCDF application. In addition to those, we wanted to make you aware of a couple other resources that are available on NPIWS program integrity site. One is the grantee internal control self-assessment instrument. That's an instrument that can help you take a look at how your agency is operating, mainly in terms of program integrity. It looks at monitoring, it looks at your error rate review process, it looks at your eligibility determination process. You can receive assistance by contacting your regional office if you'd like somebody to go through it with you, or it's available for you to do the assessment on your own. Janae Williams is originally from Louisiana, and when Janae was at Louisiana still, she actually used the internal self-assessment instrument for her agency just to check out how they were doing in terms of program integrity and how they might improve some of their operations. So we encourage you to check it out. And then finally, the National Center on Subsidy Innovation and Accountability Program Integrity Resource landing page will give you some information on other webinars we have offered before, as well as the error rate process, the self-assessment instrument, and our fraud toolkit. So we encourage you to check any of those out.
And
See if we
Michael,
have
there was
any
another
more
question
comments. Yeah.
that came in around asking if parents have to provide ID, what should they do about parents who don't have IDs? And that's a great question. So under the CCDF rule, lead agencies can't condition a child's eligibility for services based on the citizenship or immigration status of their parents. So you should make sure that there are options to verify identity of the parents that don't require citizenship or having a social security number. So you could allow applicants to submit different types of identification, like a school ID, a work ID, school records, medical records, a foreign passport or birth certificate, a foreign driver's license, a consular ID, a US driver's license or non-driver ID, a US birth certificate or passport, or any other document that reasonably verifies identity. There are also some states that have allowed families to sign a written statement that self-verifies their identity if no other documentation is available. So that's a great question, and in the guide, if you need to point any members of your team to that.
All right, thank you, Sarah. I don't see any other questions right now. So as we move to wrap up today's presentation, we're going to ask you to complete the evaluation that you'll see pop up at the end of this webinar. It really helps us to tailor our future webinars based on your feedback and what you want to see in the future. And again, a reminder, technical assistance is always available. Just make a request through your regional office because they know best where to send you to get the help that you need. Our next program integrity webinar will really depend on the topics that you want to hear about. So please take the time to complete the evaluation today and let us know what type of topics you would like to see presented in the future. So with that, we're just going to see if anybody else has any more questions today. Want to thank our presenters today, Sarah and Janae and Rebecca, and thanks for kicking us off. And Teresa, thank you so much for the technical support today. So thanks for tuning in. We're going to get done a little early today. And so we're going to give you about 25 minutes of your day back. We thank you for joining us today.
And if you are doing great innovative things in your state and you want to share and maybe present on a future webinar, certainly let us know.
Absolutely. All right, so fill out that evaluation. And again, thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.